Welcome to the RNL Revolution Nothing Less show. Today is October 28th, 2021. This is our 76th episode. My name is Andy Z. I'm coming to you from Los Angeles, California. Today's RNL Revolution Nothing Less show is going to feature two discussions. One on the environmental crisis and the reality that nothing short of an actual revolution to bring into being a radically new society as envisioned in the Constitution for a new Socialist Republic in North America can save the planet and its people from the existential crisis of global warming. And we are also featuring an interview I did with the writer Paul Street, who is a member of the Refuse Fascism editorial board, on the hardening and metastasizing of the fascist movement at the top of society that runs deep right to where people live. Over the past several months, we have pivoted the RNL show around a declaration, a call to get organized now for a real revolution, and Bob Avakian's companion piece, This is a Rare Time When Revolution Becomes Possible. Why that is so, and how to seize on this rare opportunity. In this, Bob Avakian makes the analysis that this is one of the rare circumstances because of the great divide between the Republican Fascist Party and the Democrats at the top of society, with that divide cleaving the whole country, and that it cannot be resolved within the framework that has governed American society since the Civil War. Questions are posed. Why is revolution necessary? What goes into a revolution, including how could we really win? And what is it for? What comes next? And that last question is where we're going to focus in this first segment. Here it stands out what an enormous contribution it is to the future of humanity that Bob Avakian has authored the Constitution for a new Socialist Republic in North America. Think about all that will go into a real revolution to overthrow this system, which, as a declaration and call straightforwardly says, is not playing around with a few changes that leaves this system in place and in power while benefiting only a small number. A revolution means a force of millions drawn from many different parts of society and organized for an all-out fight to overthrow this system and replace it with a radically different and much better economic and political system, a socialist system. Now, if you think about this seriously, with all that will be involved in meeting and defeating the forces of repression of this system, how much it matters that there is a document that is a blueprint for a new society on the road to human emancipation. This achievement is a stellar example of where it starkly stands out, why we say that a leader like Bob Avakian has never before existed in the history of this country, and that this leadership is of tremendous importance for the emancipation of all humanity. This Constitution is a concentration of the scientific breakthrough of the new communism that B.A. Bob Avakian has developed. Now we're going to play a film clip of B.A. answering a question of what will the new society look like the day after a revolution is won. But first, and as an introduction, I want to read a statement that is a deep and beautiful concentration of what is in this Constitution. As I go along, I'm going to interject a few comments to draw your attention to and to enable us to pause and to think about what's said, and to indicate the ways that over time we will be getting into this Constitution more on the Revolution Nothing Less show. So here we go. Quote, "It is a fact that nowhere else in any actual proposed founding or guiding document of any government is there anything like not only the protection, but the provision for dissent and intellectual and cultural ferment that is embodied in this Constitution." Now, this statement is as bold as it is true. It is a remarkable achievement. Think about how radically different that kind of society would be. To repeat and then continue, nowhere else in any actual or proposed founding or guiding document of any government is there anything like not only the protection, but the provision for dissent and intellectual and cultural ferment that is embodied in this Constitution. And the statement goes on, quote, "While this has as its solid core a grounding in the socialist transformation of the economy, with the goal of abolishing all exploitation, and the corresponding transformation of the social relations and political institutions to uproot all oppression, end quote. And I interject again, what does this new economy look like? And how and why does a radically new economy make possible abolishing all exploitation? And what does it mean by corresponding the transformation of social relations, such as racial and gender oppression, and the political institutions to uproot all oppression? The statement continues, quote, and the promotion through the educational system and in society as a whole of an approach that will enable people to pursue the truth wherever it leads, with a spirit of critical thinking and scientific curiosity. And in this way, to continually learn about the world and be better able to contribute to changing it in accordance with the fundamental interests of humanity, end quote. Here, I want to stop and draw your attention to this because it's a foundation of the new communism. Bob Avakian stresses the great importance of determining and standing on what is actually true, further developing the scientific method and approach to reality, to revolution, and to communism, without which the society would be cast back to the horrors that characterize the world today, a society where might makes right. And to see this more graphically, go to basics from the talks and writings of Bob Avakian's, quote, 410. But this statement continues, quote, all this will unchain and unleash a tremendous, productive, and social force of human beings enabled and inspired to work and struggle together to meet the fundamental needs of the people, transforming society in a fundamental way and supporting and aiding revolutionary struggle throughout the world, aiming for the final goal of a communist world free from all exploitation and oppression, while at the same time addressing the truly existential environmental and ecological crisis in a meaningful and comprehensive way, which is impossible under the system of capitalism-imperialism, end quote. Now here, the goal is as inspiring as it is rooted in a profound understanding of all that is involved in making the great leap to the emancipation of humanity throughout the whole world. You can find this whole quotation from Bob Avakian's New Year's statement at the website revcom.us, and we're going to be digging into and returning to this Constitution for a new socialist republic in future episodes. Today, we want to show you BA's answer to a question that was raised from the audience after his speech in 2018, why we need an actual revolution and how we could really make revolution. The segment is titled, What Would Society Look Like Right After the Revolution?
What does the world look like a week after the revolution, like a month after, a year after? I know it's a very intense question, but that's kind of where my mind is at.
Okay, well, first of all, I would say that in a broad and basic sense that some of that is spoken to directly in the Constitution for the new Socialist Republic in North America. So that's somewhere you could go to get a living sense of that. As far as the day after, well, to be scientific and honest about it, one of the things it'll look like is there will have been a lot of destruction, overwhelmingly brought down by the old ruling forces, and a lot of immediate need for reconstruction, but on a different basis. And that's both a real problem, but also a means to accomplish something positive, in the sense that a lot of people who in the old society were unable, and prevented from doing meaningful work, for example, can find a meaningful purpose in helping to rebuild the whole society, but on a completely different basis, including giving a high priority to the basic needs of people, especially those, not only those, but especially those who have been denied a lot of the basic necessities of life under the old system. So that's one thing. Destruction, the effects of destruction, mainly brought down by the old ruling class, and the reconstruction. And then, in the realm outside of just the material conditions, so to speak, there should be a lot of political vibrancy with a lot of people who've been brought forward through this process and who have, in a beginning way, not in any kind of complete or absolute sense certainly, but in a beginning way, begin to transform their own way of approaching the world and their way of interacting with other people. There should be a lot of political ferment the day after or the week after, the year after about, okay, how we have this basis now to go, to build a new kind of society aiming for a whole new world. Okay, how do we go about doing that? A lot of percolation, if you will, a lot of ferment, in over those kind of questions, but also going back to what was raised about culture, a lot of, beginning ferment in the realm of art and culture, a lot of creativity being unleashed that's been suppressed under the old society, not only politically suppressed, but suppressed by the conditions of life and the relations that people are enmeshed in, which suffocate a lot of that out of people, under the present set of relations. But I don't want to present an incorrectly and dishonestly rosy picture as if everything will be great. There will be a lot of contradiction, a lot of struggle. One of the things that has to be recognized is you don't make. This is something that Lenin said after his experience of the Russian Revolution. You don't make revolution with people as you would like them to be. You make revolution as they have been, quote unquote, bequeathed to you by the old society. So there'll be a lot of backward stuff still among people. There'll be a lot to be struggled out, particularly, say, in the realm of intimate relations, in particular the relations between men and women and the family and all that. There'll be, a tremendous amount of struggle. But the point is, instead of things working to reinforce the oppressive relations, what is now emerging as a dominant political structure, institutions, and process, and the newly, emerging culture will be giving support and impetus to the people who are struggling to overcome those oppressive relations. So there should be, and we need to work so that this is realized in reality, a tremendous amount of positive ferment and creativity that's bursting forth, and at the same time a tremendous amount of struggle against backward ways of seeing things and backward ways of doing things and backward and even oppressive ways of relating to people that are left over from the old society that are not going to be swept away just because you've overthrown the system. So there'll be all that will be in a very, will be boiling up together in a way that, that positive things can be forged out of it, but which will require struggle to do that. And then there'll be, all movement toward a whole different kind of economy, which is geared to meeting the needs of the people, not just in the, basic material sense of housing, shelter and healthcare and food and all that, which is very important, but also their needs intellectually and culturally. So the goal will be to be meeting those needs in an expanding way at the same time as there'll be a tremendous orientation toward the rest of the world. How is what we're doing here, what we've just started here with this overthrow of this old system, the beginning of a new system, how is what we're doing, how can that be a concrete source of support and aid as well as a source of inspiration to people all over the world? And believe me, if and when revolution is made in this country, there won't be hardly anybody in the world that I can think of who won't be paying attention to that. So the impact on the entire world can be very profound. Of course, that will also be a process of struggle because, in the real world, there are real material contradictions involved in this. It's all well and good, and yes, it is well and good, actually, and it's very correct and necessary to have the internationalist orientation that we're doing this for all of humanity, and we need to be, promoting and supporting the revolution all over the world. But that will stand in acute, sometimes very acute contradiction to meeting the needs of the people right then, right there, especially if you keep in mind what I said about there'll be a lot of destruction and a need for reconstruction. Those things will be very acutely in contradiction. And people say, that's all well and good, I want to do that too, but right now I don't even have a place to live. I don't have a house, I don't have any dwelling, I can't eat, my kids are hungry. What are you going to do about that? And there will be a tremendous amount of struggle to correctly handle those things in a way that pays attention to and moves to meet those very real and immediate material needs, while at the same time putting a lot of emphasis on and making real the support concretely and the inspiration ideologically, if you will, for the people in the rest of the world who also need to to make this revolution, or else not only will they continue to suffer, but the gains that are made in any particular place, including the revolution that will just be made here, will be in danger of being reversed. Because you can't exist just as an isolated, base all unto yourself. There are still forces out there that are going to work to attack and undermine what you're trying to do and destroy it if they can. And, as long as you're still living in a world which is mainly dominated by the economic relations and the economic dynamics of an alien system, an oppressive and exploitative system, you cannot be unaffected by that. There is a principle that a socialist country should be strategically self-reliant economically, but you cannot be, and you should not attempt to be, self-reliant absolutely. You're still going to need to engage in the larger world, including trade and some economic relations. And as long as most of the world is operating according to principles that are directly opposed to what you're working to do, then that's going to have a great effect on what's happening within the new socialist society, the revolutionary society that you've brought forward, as well as having terrible consequences for the rest of the people in the world who are still living under the old system. So all of this is what will be, a lot of foment, a lot of ferment, a lot of struggle. This will be fomenting a lot of struggle and ferment, I should say, in terms of how do we handle these contradictions. But at the same time, it really will be like, a spring after a very long and bitter winter. I will say that.
Back in August, the United Nations released a report from the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, what's called the IPCC Report. And this report revealed that the climate catastrophe that is facing humanity is accelerating on a pace far beyond what scientists had previously anticipated. A new writing team came together and produced a very powerful segment on this report for the Revolution Nothing Less show, and we're going to link to it in the description below. We recommend you watch it if you haven't. We want to show just a sample of what was in the special segment that the RNL show did on the IPCC report.
The new UN report on climate change, a more accurate and alarming picture of the peril facing our planet.
On the 31st of this month, on October 31st, leaders of governments from around the world will meet in Glasgow, Scotland at a UN climate summit. And here to talk with us about what's at stake and what we should expect from this summit is one of the members of the writing team that produced the segment for the RNL show on the IPCC report. We want to welcome John. Welcome to the RNL, the Revolution Nothing Less show.
Thank you so much, Sunsara. It's great to be here.
First of all, I just want to express my real appreciation to you and everybody who worked on that writing team. It was a very powerful segment you all did on the IPCC, the climate report from the UN. And we'll link to it in the description of this video for people who haven't seen it. We really recommend it. I'm hoping that the first thing you could do is help our viewers understand what to expect from this climate meeting in Glasgow. What's at stake, what's the situation, and what should we expect from this UN gathering?
Yeah, as you said, Sunsara, this Conference of Parties, COP26, is starting in Glasgow, Scotland, October 31st. And this is a follow-up meeting to the Paris Climate Agreement of 2015. So that agreement set non-binding targets for countries to curb their greenhouse gas emissions. The supposed goal, right, of Paris 2015 was to keep global warming well below 2 degrees pre-industrial levels of global average temperatures. The targets that were set at that conference, it was known that they were wildly insufficient to meet that goal of below 2 degrees warming. You mentioned the IPCC report in the video segment on that. One of the important things about that report was that it really demonstrated how what a significant difference it is between 2 degrees warming and 1.5 degrees warming Celsius. How much worse it would be, how much worse 2 degrees warming would be compared to 1.5 degrees. And so one of the things about this conference, based on that new science and the developments of that report, is that the goal needs to be 1.5 degrees warming. Although it must be said that 1.5 degrees warming is not a safe threshold, right? There would be very dire consequences to 1.5 degrees warming. But nonetheless, let's talk a little bit before we move on what it would take to keep warming below 1.5 degrees. So scientists estimate that emissions must be reduced by 45% by 2030 compared with 2010 levels. And from there, we would have to reach net zero emissions, global net zero emissions by 2050. And to be clear, that would not be a guarantee, but it would give us a chance of not reaching beyond 1.5 degrees of warming. As you mentioned, some of these new commitments that countries are being asked to submit have already been released prior to the conference. And yet again, 6 years later, these new commitments are completely insufficient. And when you couple these new commitments to curb greenhouse gases that countries have submitted with old commitments from countries that have not yet submitted new commitments, rather than a 45% decrease by 2030, this would actually lead to a 16% increase in global emissions. It's simply unconscionable what is happening. What is happening right now, and it's really, insult heaped upon injury. And that they set legally non-binding goals, which means that they don't have to actually abide by them. And then even these goals are not good enough to do what's required. And these global conferences, climate conferences, are a farce and a fraud, and they really need to be called out as such, and people need to be waging mass resistance to these charades and these claims and honeyed words of cutting emissions and tackling the climate scenario when really we're going in the exact opposite direction.
You know, one of the things I think came through extremely powerfully in the segment that you all produced was how already people around the world are experiencing the effects of this climate change, the massive heat waves, the unprecedented flooding, the superstorms, the fires that are fire season coming earlier and burning more out of control. The oceans are rising, ice caps are melting. There's tremendous impact already. What is your sense of what it would take to deal with this global emergency?
We need an entirely different system. We need system change. You know, in order to deal with climate change, we need system change. It really requires a complete restructuring of the global economic system, of the way things are produced, the way things are distributed, the way things are consumed, and that requires a revolution. You know, this requires a revolution, and it requires bringing into being an entirely different new socialist system. And I know on this show, you often talk about the Constitution for the New Socialist Republic in North America, authored by Bob Avakian, that lays out a blueprint for how to create an entirely different economic, political, social system and a different culture based on that. And as it relates to the climate crisis, you know, much of the oil that is being currently pumped out of the ground, right? This is one of the energy system and the oil is a key feature of that. That's what's driving this climate crisis. Most of that oil has to be left in the ground, right? With all of the capital, you know, that's sunk into that, and all of the expectations of future profit that, you know, that's invested in that. And these companies have to be put out of business. And that's something that can only happen under a socialist system, right? Where you have a revolutionary state power that backs that up. That can't happen under this system. And so that's what we need. That's what people need to be organizing for. And that's what we need to be, struggling with people over in terms of this climate emergency and what it's actually going to take to deal with it.
Well, that's exactly what I wanted to ask you about next, because I know that you have been doing exactly that. You've been taking the segment that you were part of producing for the RNL show on the IPCC report, but also previous segments from the Revolution Nothing Less show on the climate, like the Earth Day special we did, and other things out to people and putting it in front of people and struggling with them over it, including, my impression is that this includes people who are deeply concerned about the climate, scientists working in the field, people in academia, people in the university setting, some students. I wonder if you could give some sense of what kind of response you've gotten as you take this up, particularly as you're putting before people, as both these segments you've been taking out do, that the problem is built into the system of capitalism. It's a feature, not a bug, and that there is an alternative with a real revolution, with this Constitution BA has authored. What has that opened up in people's thinking positively? What resistance maybe have you run into? What has that prompted from people?
One thing that really struck me, particularly in taking out this IPCC segment, is that a lot of people who are well informed about the climate crisis are not really had not really read this report or even read reports of this new IPCC report. And I think that there was a sense from people, which was a little bit surprising to me, that people kind of know it's bad, the climate crisis. They know it's bad, and they don't want to think about it too much, and they're not really abreast of the new science and the new reporting that's coming out. And this is not a good thing, right? I mean, this is people that I think this speaks to people's lowered sights, and that leads people to not, act in ways that are commensurate with the scope of this crisis, and also not to seek out, kind of the answers to why this is really happening and look for a solution. And the great thing about these segments is that, as you said, these segments bring this to people in alternative. And the other thing I was really struck by in taking this out is that a lot of people really haven't engaged with even really thought much about what an alternative society could look like, or engaged with the possibility of such a society being brought into being. And I think when, especially in taking this out to younger people, college students, people, in their late teens and early 20s, people of that generation really do care about this issue, about the climate crisis. That's not always clear, right? That people care about this. I mean, a lot of times, it seems like on the surface that there's a lot of apathy and capitulation to this, but people really do care. And when, people get a glimpse of this alternative and how a socialist society would deal with the climate crisis in these clips. And that's really inspiring to people. That is really a world in which people would want to live, and a world in which people's creativity, people's ideas, people's passion would be harnessed and fostered and given breath to it and unleashed. And I think that's something that, on the one hand, people hadn't really considered that there was an alternative and what that alternative would look like. And then when presented with it, there is a sense of inspiration and excitement about this possibility.
I think that's so important, that people need to know that there's an alternative. And it does make a big difference. I wonder if there's any other reactions that you want to share.
Even from people who, are really not at all on board for the idea of or the need for revolution or for socialism, there was a sense from people that they had to kind of concede that when it came to the indictment of capitalism in terms of how it deals with the environment, that there's something to that, that this system really doesn't seem to have any answers for this. And I think that's really something that we need to focus in on and home in on for people, is that people have a sense, again, even those who are not necessarily friendly to this vision, that this system is not working in terms of its relationship to the environment and in terms of its inability to deal with the climate crisis. And that's something that was really striking to me, again, even for people who took a lot of issue with stuff from these segments.
I want to encourage everybody watching to take that example and be part of taking this out far and wide and letting us know what you're running into. And for you, John, I want to thank you for taking the time to come on the RNL show to share your perspective, your experience, some of your insights working on this and spreading it.
Thank you for having me, Sunsara. It was a great honor to be on the RNL show.
So before we move forward in the episode, I really want to underscore the importance of taking out that special segment on the IPCC climate report that we were talking about there. It really makes the case for the emergency we face, why only a revolution and system change can solve this climate crisis, and it brings forward a vision concretely of what a revolution could make possible. It needs to be seen all over the place, and we're really encouraging all of you to take this, to spread it to people you know, to get it shown in classrooms, to project it on walls, to spread it online and on social media, and talk with people about what's in it. It's also really important that people stand up and protest the crimes against humanity's future that are going down at this climate summit. And where there are protests, we should bring this revolution into those protests and take this to people, as well as throughout society. So I want to point you to revcom.us, where you'll find ongoing coverage of what comes out of this climate summit, but also materials to download, to spread this understanding of the climate emergency. And so with that, we want to move forward in the episode. We're going to share with you a brief TikTok produced by the social media volunteers who work with the Revcoms, and then we'll go to our next segment.
Why is the world so messed up? It's the greedy corporations. It's clearly the men. It's the white people. Well, it's God and deviations from his holy words. Bullshit. The world is so messed up because of this system of capitalism-imperialism. The fact that you have socially produced wealth being privately appropriated by capitalists who are locked in competition with each other and who own the means of production. The means of production being the tools, the raw materials, the land to be able to produce things. What's the solution? The revolutionary overthrow of this capitalist state and its replacement with a socialist state with the goal of communism. Read Why the World is So Messed Up and What Can Be Done to Radically Change This, A Basic Scientific Understanding by Bob Avakian.
All right, Paul Street is an award-winning journalist, historian, and writer based in Iowa City, Iowa, and Chicago, Illinois. He's the author of 10 books, including his upcoming book is This Happened Here, Neoliberals, Amerikaners, and Trumping of America. Paul writes regularly for Counterpunch, and he is a member of the editorial board of Refuse Fascism, along with myself and Sunsara Taylor. So today we're going to be discussing some of the developments of fascism and how that's shaping the political situation. And as you are aware, and as our viewers know, the Revcoms have issued a declaration, a call to get organized now for a real revolution that makes the argument that now is the time to do this, organize for a real revolution, because of the sharp split at the top of society, with a divide such that the U.S. is in reality two countries with one border, and the specter of civil war permeates the public discourse. So I want to begin our discussion by discussing some of the grassroots texture of this situation, and then we can touch on the consolidation and the hardening of fascism in Trump's Republican Fascist Party. But to begin with, to provide some texture for our audience, in an article you wrote earlier this month, you wrote some notes from an Amerikaner heartland, in which you spoke of how this feels on the ground in Iowa, where you live part of the time. And in that same piece, you also spoke of the situation that teachers face and the unbridgeable polarization that's taking place in school board meetings and even when kids are walking to school. So let's start here, and you're sharing some of your direct observations, but also some of what the situation is on the ground in places like Iowa, but you can branch out to around the country.
You know, I was really struck by your reference to two separate nations. I'm back and forth between Illinois and Iowa all the time, and it's just astonishing. And when I'm in Chicago, everybody's masked up in the grocery stores. Everybody's masked up in the public buildings. When I go to Iowa, nobody's masked up. There really just is this very separate kind of feeling. I have had experiences in Iowa, and you know, a lot of what goes on in red states, a lot of our left and liberal intellectuals are sort of caught up in. They tend to live in blue areas. They tend to live in democratic areas, and there's a certain kind of dismissal of what's going on off in those distant so-called flyover zones, flyover states. You know, oh, that's going on down there. Oh, that's a shame what happened in Texas. Well, a hell of a lot of people live in red states. More than 100 million people live in red states. You know, it's really not appropriate to go, well, you know, to Texas and Iowa and the Confederate states and South, they secede. Oh, the hell with them. I mean, come on. There's millions of really good and decent people. And there's all kinds of people of color. There's women, of course, obviously all across the South, and you know, the Bible Belt that's attacking abortion rights and so forth. And you know, and these people matter, and life matters in the red states. On top of which, the red states are ridiculously over-empowered in the national political structure. Maybe we can talk about that later. They're full of all kinds of national political significance. But, you know, just give you a little bit of a taste of red state life. Though this is not unlike, this also happens in red areas in blue states. You could find some similar experiences in like rural northern or central Illinois. But for example, you're in a store. I'm in a store, in the Natural Foods Co-op in, you know, in nice liberal, progressive, multicultural Iowa City, a campus town. And noticed that a guy's not wearing a mask, and I mentioned it to the store manager because they've got a big sign up in front of the store that says that masks are required. And it turns out up in the Cedar Rapids store of this same firm, people threaten violence. They threaten violence. They threaten to shoot somebody if they actually acted on the requirement to wear a mask. And you know, there's this undercurrent of violence across the country, particularly in red state America, but not just exclusively in red state America. There's a sense of sort of already being a little bit down the road to fascism. School boards officials are under regular violent threat for having basic public health protections. State and local election officials are reporting regularly facing violent threats because of lunatics, white nationalists carried away with the stolen election lie about 2020. And this is a real thing there. There's also an issue over at the university. This is really different. This is very different than anything I would experience in Chicago or Illinois, where the faculty can't even really mention COVID in any particular kind of serious way in classes. They at the University of Iowa, because of the red state, right-wing, white nationalist, pandemo-fascist Board of Regents in Iowa, they can't even ask kids to space out and practice social distancing. They can't even ask a kid to wear a mask in office hours, okay? That is violence, okay? A lot of us don't even, and when I'm in Iowa City, don't even want to go downtown, don't want to go to the university because it's just the Wild West. It's crazy. And that's physical violence.
That was part of this Texas law around one of the battles going on in Texas now, which is quite extreme, is the request that ballots be numbered consecutively rather than randomly, which would mean that your vote would be obvious to anybody who wanted to go inside that system and look at it. And at the very time that they're purging, even conservative and actual Trump supporters who are electoral officials who are not buying into the big lie. Maybe we should move, though, to the larger picture. And on Revcom this week, we published an article that was titled, "The GOP is now solidly united behind and under the leadership of a metastasizing hardcore of neo-fascists." The article said, quote, "The one fascist mob from January 6th has now metastasized into mini mobs all over the country, menacing and threatening public health officials with support masks and vaccines, election officials who simply say that Trump lost the election, and education officials who want to teach children the truth about America's unbroken record of slavery, Jim Crow, and white supremacy, even harassing parents walking their kids to school, screaming that they are child abusers because their kids are masked." We go on to say, all of this is increasingly part of a package, a cohered fascist movement behind the leadership of Donald Trump with legal and extra-legal wings that mutually support each other in the drive to beat, cheat, and terrorize their way back to power, and to make sure that this is unrestrained power. So I think this is important. It relates to our, how we've discussed that fascism is both the trummeling and the discarding of the rule of law. It's open and terroristic dictatorship, which by the state, but also the utilization of the mob to be able to enforce that. And earlier you were speaking about Iowa and the situation, with going into the co-op. And then more recently, you wrote about Trump's near campaign announcement in Iowa. I think it was just last week, where the senior Republican Charles Grassley and the governor of Iowa attended, which was kind of unusual. And you wrote that, quote, the presence of Grassley in particular signified that whatever qualms the GOP may have had with Trump are now faded memories, you wrote. Whatever questions they had about the direction of the party have been resolved. So I thought it'd be important for you to speak about what you drew from this experience, and also, the larger picture here of this divide and the fact that they're calling allegiance to the lie that the election was stolen.
Well, there was a brief moment in which it seemed possible that the GOP was going to reassess and perhaps think about cutting its ties with Trump in the wake of the utter atrocity of the openly fascist January 6th attack on a normal bourgeois election, an attempted coup. And it really didn't last very long at all. 80% of the Republicans believe, 80% of Republicans in the country believe that the election was stolen. when Charles Grassley, senior 80-year-old plus GOPer who was briefly critical of Trump after January 6th, shows up and gives his stamp of approval. That's very emblematic and symbolic in this very key political state because of the caucus, Iowa. Trump, that really was a sort of de facto presidential announcement. He's just chomping at the bit, and he has the party completely now unified behind him, behind a classically fascistic big lie, right? The notion of the stolen election is Goebbels and Hitler would blush, in excitement, in envy over having a lie, quite that powerful. And, talking points that used to be associated with the right-wing skinhead, marginalized fascist movement, things like replacement theory, fascist replacement theory, this crazy, wacky, conspiratorial idea that a Jewish global multinational elite is trying to replace virtuous, hardworking white Americans with indolent and criminal immigrants of color, are now mainstream within Trump's party. And my counterpunch writing, I've been renaming the Republican Party. I call it the APOT, the Amerikaner Party of Trump. Mary Trump, his very insightful liberal niece, thought initially that Trump's narcissism would be such that he would not want to run again out of the narcissistic fear of being labeled a loser a second time. That's all over now. He's chomping at the bit. He smells blood in the water. He wants to come back, and not just to come back to put an agenda. He's coming back with vengeance on his mind. He's coming back. He wants to punish his enemies. There won't be another normal bourgeois democratic election for a long, long time if and when Trump comes back.
Okay, I want to thank you, Paul, for this discussion. We got into a lot of different things. There's all kinds of things that we can probe more deeply, and we will because of the unfolding situation. This is the reality we're living in. So once again, thanks for coming on the RNL Revolution Nothing Less show.
Hey, thanks for having me. Anytime, Andy. I look forward to the next time we speak.
All right, good.
So, Andy, I think that interview with Paul, you really get a sense of how there are two countries in one right now. We really are in a very intense time. And I know you spoke about quite a bit more in the interview that we weren't able to include in the episode tonight. So I wonder if there's any further reflections you want to share before we close out the show.
Well, in the part that we didn't show, I brought up in one of the articles that he wrote on Counterpunch, he referred to an op-ed by Robert Kagan in the Washington Post, and I went back and looked it up, and it was from September 23rd. And I wanted to read a quote from that article by Kagan, and then something from the Declaration and Call to Get Organized Now for a Real Revolution. But first off, who's Robert Kagan? Robert Kagan was one of the original neocons, who were a group of neoconservative, that's what that stands for, who under the presidency of George W. Bush launched the Iraq War, which was a monstrous war crime and is still shaping things today. And Kagan provided a good deal of the intellectual, if you can call it that, rationale for the war. In short, he's a thorough reactionary, but like other of the neocons who were actually neo-fascists, he and they have become never-Trumpers, which are these Republicans who want to maintain what they were doing in the early aughts and before that, and are opposed to Trump. But they've also been more willing to call out Trump and even to call Trump and the Republican Party today fascist. But this is what I read from the op-ed from the Washington Post. I read this to Paul. Quote, Kagan says, the United States is heading into the greatest political and constitutional crisis since the Civil War, with a reasonable chance over the next 3 to 4 years of incidents of mass violence, a breakdown of federal authority, and the division of the country into warring red and blue enclaves. The warning signs may be obscured by the distractions of politics, the pandemic, the economy, and global crises, and by wishful thinking and denial. He goes on to say the stage is thus being set for chaos. Imagine weeks of competing mass protests across multiple states as lawmakers from both parties claim victory and they charge the other with unconstitutional efforts to take power. Partisans on both sides, he says, are likely to be better armed and more willing to inflict harm than they were in 2020. And would the governors call out the National Guard? Would President Biden nationalize the Guard and place it under his control and invoke the Insurrection Act and send troops into Pennsylvania or Texas or Wisconsin to quell violent protests? Deploying federal power in the states would be decried as tyranny, end quote. And then he harkens back to Lincoln at the period right after the Civil War, when how the country would be put back together was in question. So I think the reason I wanted to read that is I think it's an important illustration of a critical point from a declaration, a call to get organized now for a real revolution. And that point is this. These days, there is a lot of talk about another civil war, especially from fascists in government and the broader society, who think that they could just carry out a one-sided slaughter of those they hate, including black people and other people of color, illegal immigrants, uppity women, and those who don't conform to traditional sexual and gender relations and norms. This situation needs to be radically changed to where there are masses of people prepared to defeat these fascists and to do so as part of getting rid of this whole system which has bred these fascists, along with all the other horrors it continually perpetrates. What we need is repolarization for revolution, making real revolution an active and increasingly powerful force of first thousands and then millions of people organized to work for and to win more and more people to this revolution, radically changing the terrain on which the revolution will be fought. So I just wanted to add that in because I thought, we got the texture of how this is sharp on the ground, but we have to also understand that there are people, powerful people, reactionary people, as well as others who are seeing how sharp this divide is, and that indicates not that we should take one side against the other, but in fact that we need to be repolarizing for an actual revolution. So with that, I think we can move on with the rest of our show, which is what?
Which is to say, we want you to spread this show, subscribe to the channel. We basically are at the end of the show. We want to say Happy Halloween, and we'll be back next week.
Okay, there are ghouls and monsters out there, and it's your job to get organized to slay them.